The village square erupted in chaos. Smoke from roasted maize curled through the afternoon air as angry voices collided over a broken basket of yams scattered across the dusty ground. Women pointed fingers. Men raised their voices. Children pressed close to see what the argument was about. Then Kola, the stranger who had arrived barely a week ago, stepped forward with his clever smile and confident voice. "It wasn't me who broke it," he declared loudly, though everyone had seen him knock against the basket moments before. "I was standing on the other side of the market when it fell. Ask anyone." The words left his mouth smoothly, as they always did. But this time, something terrible happened. His throat seized shut like invisible hands wrapping around his neck. His voice died mid-breath. A crushing pressure spread across his chest, burning like fire in his lungs. Kola's eyes went wide with terror. He clutched at his throat, gasping silently. The crowd fell deathly quiet. An old woman whispered, her voice carrying through the stillness. "The village has finally caught him." Kola collapsed to his knees, unable to make a sound. But this story truly began days earlier, when Kola first walked down the long dusty road that led into Ironmo village. His clothes were worn thin from traveling, his shoes held together with bits of string, and his only possession was a faded cloth bag slung over his shoulder. Yet despite his poverty, Kola walked with his head high and his smile sharp. He had survived this long by talking his way into people's kindness, telling stories that weren't quite true, making promises he never intended to keep, and charming his way to free meals and soft places to sleep. As the village came into view, Kola's eyes brightened with opportunity. Clay houses with thatched roofs clustered together beneath swaying palm trees. Women balanced baskets on their heads, moving between market stalls. Farmers carried bundles of cassava along narrow paths. The warm smell of cooking oil and wood smoke drifted on the breeze. Everything looked peaceful, simple, and, most importantly to Kola, easy. He adjusted his bag and practiced his friendliest smile. This village would be no different from all the others, he thought. A few clever lies, some charming words, and he'd eat well for weeks. How wrong he was. Kola's first stop was a small roadside stall where an elderly woman sold roasted maize and ground nuts. Her face was kind, creased with lines from years of smiling. She looked like the perfect target. "Good afternoon, Mama," Kola said, adding just the right amount of tiredness to his voice. "I've traveled so far, and thieves took everything I had on the road. My money, my food, all gone. I haven't eaten in 2 days." None of this was true. He'd eaten that very morning from another lie told in another village. The old woman's face softened with sympathy. "Oh, you poor child. Sit, sit. Let me get you something." She handed him 2 ears of hot maize and a small bag of groundnuts, refusing to take any payment. "May God bless you on your journey," she said warmly. Kola thanked her with practiced sincerity and walked away, already peeling the maize. But as he bit into it, he noticed something strange. Several villagers nearby had stopped their conversations and were staring at him with puzzled expressions. One man leaned toward another and whispered urgently, "Why didn't the village stop him?" Kola kept walking, but unease prickled at the back of his neck. Curiosity drove Kola to linger near the market, listening. He sat beneath a mango tree, pretending to rest while his ears caught fragments of conversation. 2 women stood nearby, sorting vegetables into baskets. The younger one spoke in a low, careful voice. "I still can't believe my cousin tried to lie about the missing goat last month." The moment the words left her mouth, she couldn't speak for 3 days. The older woman nodded gravely. "The village doesn't forgive lies. It never has. That's why we teach our children from birth, speak only truth, or lose your voice entirely." "Even the chief follows the rule," the younger woman added. "Remember when he accidentally gave a wrong report about the harvest? He couldn't speak until he corrected it publicly." Kola nearly laughed out loud. A village where people lose their voices for lying? It sounded like a children's tale meant to scare them into honesty. Superstition and nonsense. But a small voice in his mind whispered, "Then why did those villagers seem so surprised when nothing happened to you?" Kola pushed the thought away and smiled to himself. If the villagers believed in such foolishness, they'd be even easier to deceive. The next morning, Kola approached a farmer struggling with a broken cart beside the road. The wooden wheel had cracked, leaving the cart tilted awkwardly with sacks of grain threatening to spill. "I can fix that for you," Kola announced confidently. "I worked as a carpenter for 5 years in the city. I've repaired hundreds of carts." This was completely false. Kola had never held a carpenter's tool in his life. The farmer, a stocky man named Bamadil, looked him up and down skeptically. "You know carpentry?" "Of course," Kola replied smoothly. "Give me 2 days and a small payment, and your cart will be stronger than new." Bamadil hesitated, then pulled out a few coins and handed them over. "The wood and tools are in my shed. I'll check your progress tomorrow." Kola pocketed the money, already planning to disappear before the farmer discovered the truth. But as he walked away, he waited for something to happen, some magical punishment, some tightening of his throat. Nothing. He breathed normally. His voice remained strong. The lie had passed through him like water through a sieve, leaving no trace. Behind him, villagers exchanged worried glances. This had never happened before. That evening, as Kola sat near the village well drinking water, an elderly woman approached him. Her hair was completely white, her back slightly bent, but her eyes were sharp and penetrating. This was Mama Saad, the oldest person in the village and keeper of its stories. She sat beside him without asking permission, studying his face in the fading light. "You're the stranger who's been lying," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Kola laughed and shrugged. "People say lots of things. The village has a rule," Mama Saad continued, her voice steady and serious. "Truth is sacred here. Lies are not tolerated. Every person who speaks falsehood loses their voice immediately, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, depending on the severity." "Then why can I still talk?" Kola challenged, his tone mocking. Mama Saada's expression didn't change. "Strangers sometimes escape the punishment, but only for a while. The village watches. It measures. And when the debt becomes too heavy," she paused, letting the silence speak. "What happens?" Kola asked, suddenly less amused. "Every lie has a day it returns," Mama Saad said softly. Then she stood and walked away, leaving Kola alone with the darkening sky and the first whisper of doubt in his heart. Despite the warning, Kola continued lying. Days passed, and with each successful deception, his confidence grew. He told a hunter he had killed a leopard with his bare hands. He promised a widow he would repair her leaking roof but never returned. He claimed to children that he had traveled across the ocean to distant lands filled with gold. Every lie slipped out effortlessly, and every time, nothing happened. His voice remained strong. His throat stayed clear. The mysterious village punishment everyone spoke of seemed like pure fantasy. The villagers grew increasingly uneasy. Mothers pulled their children closer when Kola walked by. Men stopped sharing their food with him. Women no longer smiled at his stories. "How is this possible?" one farmer muttered to another. "The village always responds to lies. Always." "Maybe he's different," the other replied nervously. "Maybe outsiders are exempt." But the oldest villagers, those who remembered the ancient stories, knew better. They watched Kola with worried eyes, seeing something he couldn't, that every lie he told was being recorded somewhere invisible, stacking like stones in a pile that would eventually topple. Kola noticed none of this. He believed he had outsmarted an entire village. Word of the stranger who could lie spread through Ironmo like smoke through dry grass. People who lived on the village edges came to see for themselves. Children whispered about him in fascinated horror. Even traders from neighboring settlements heard the stories and arrived to witness the impossible man. Some villagers feared he would corrupt their sacred tradition. Others worried that his presence would bring misfortune. A few elders suggested he should be asked to leave before something terrible happened. Finally, the village chief, a tall, dignified man named Chief Adeyemi, called for a meeting. The entire village gathered beneath the ancient Iroko tree in the center square, its massive branches providing shade for the crowd below. Chief Adeyemi stood with his staff of office, waiting for silence. When it came, he spoke clearly. The stranger has been among us for 7 days. In that time, he has spoken many falsehoods, yet the village has not punished him as it punishes us. This troubles many of you, and I understand why. The crowd murmured in agreement. Tomorrow, the chief continued, I will speak with this stranger myself. We will learn his intentions and remind him of our ways. The announcement brought relief to some faces, worry to others. But everyone agreed on one thing. Something had to be done about Kola before the balance of truth in their village was broken forever. The next morning, Chief Adeyemi summoned Kola to his compound. The chief's home was larger than most, with carved wooden pillars and a veranda shaded by palm fronds. Kola arrived wearing his most innocent expression, already preparing lies in case they were needed. The chief sat on a woven mat, gesturing for Kola to sit opposite him. For a long moment, he simply studied the young stranger with calm, measuring eyes. You are new to our village, Chief Adeyemi began, his voice neither harsh nor warm. So perhaps you do not yet understand our most important tradition. In Ironmo, truth is the foundation of everything. Our ancestors built this village on honesty, and we maintain it the same way. Kola nodded politely, though inside he felt nothing but contempt for such primitive ideas. When someone speaks a lie, the chief continued, the village itself responds. The punishment is swift and certain. This has protected us from deceit for generations. He leaned forward slightly. But you, stranger, seem to have avoided this punishment. Do you know why? Kola shook his head, genuinely curious despite himself. I do not know either, the chief admitted. But I warn you now, respect our tradition. Speak only truth while you are here. Kola bowed his head and promised to behave, but the promise itself was a lie. Later that afternoon, Kola found himself near Bamadil's farm, where yam mounds rose in neat rows across the red earth. The farmer was working in his field, his broad back glistening with sweat under the hot sun. Kola approached with his friendliest smile. Brother Bamadil, I need your help. I have an opportunity to sell goods in the next town, but I need yams to begin my trade. Lend me just 1 sack, and when I return in 2 weeks, I'll give you double, 2 sacks for your one. This was, of course, completely false. Kola had no intention of selling anything or returning with payment. Bamadil straightened slowly, wiping his hands on his worn trousers. He studied Kola's face for a long moment, and something in his expression made Kola's confidence waver slightly. You promise to bring back 2 sacks? Bamadil asked quietly. I swear it, Kola replied, placing his hand over his heart in a gesture of sincerity. The farmer nodded and walked to his storage barn, returning with a full sack of yams. He handed it to Kola without another word. But as Kola turned to leave, Bamadil spoke softly, almost to himself, truth always returns to collect its debt. For the first time since arriving in the village, Kola felt a genuine chill run down his spine. That evening, feeling bold from his successful deception, Kola gathered a group of villagers near the market and began telling stories. He claimed he had once worked in a royal palace, serving the king himself. He described golden halls and servants in silk robes, his voice growing louder and more confident with each detail. The villagers listened, some with skepticism, others with cautious interest. Children sat at his feet, eyes wide with wonder. The king trusted me completely, Kola declared, warming to his tale. He would ask my advice on important matters, and I. His voice cracked. Just for an instant, like a stick snapping inside his throat, the words caught and twisted painfully. Kola coughed and continued, but the moment had been noticed. Several villagers exchanged meaningful glances. Mama Saad, sitting at the edge of the gathering, leaned forward slightly, her ancient eyes narrowing. "It has started," she whispered to the woman beside her. Kola finished his story to polite applause, but his hands were trembling slightly. He told himself it was nothing, just a dry throat from talking too much. But deep inside, beneath all his bravado and lies, a seed of fear had begun to sprout. Something was changing, and he could feel it. 12. Over the following days, Kola's luck began to turn. The food seller who had once given him free maize now refused to even look at him when he approached a stall. The children who had gathered eagerly for his stories now ran away when they saw him coming. And Bamadil, the farmer he had deceived, started asking pointed questions about when the yams would be returned. "Soon," Kola would say, backing away. "Very soon. Just a few more days." But everyone could hear the hollowness in his promises. Worse still, doors that had once opened for him now remained firmly shut. When he knocked asking for work, people claimed they had none. When he requested food, they suddenly had nothing to spare. The entire village seemed to be turning its back on him simultaneously. Kola grew angry rather than afraid. How dare these simple villagers judge him? What gave them the right to treat him like a criminal when all he'd done was tell a few harmless stories? His resentment festered like a wound, blinding him to the obvious truth, that the villagers weren't judging him. They were protecting themselves from someone they could no longer trust. And trust, in Ironmo village, was everything. 13. Frustration and desperation drove Kola to make his biggest mistake yet. He needed to regain the villagers' respect and prove he still had power in this place. So he devised a plan that would either restore his position or destroy it completely. One morning, he walked through the village announcing loudly to anyone who would listen, "The chief has personally asked me to collect contributions for road repairs. Every household should give what they can, yams, money, or labor commitments. I'll be recording everything and reporting directly to Chief Adeyemi." This was an enormous lie, far bigger than any he had told before. Some villagers immediately looked suspicious. Others, especially the older ones who remembered the chief's recent meeting, seemed shocked. But a few younger people, less familiar with village politics, began gathering offerings to give to Kola. The story spread rapidly through Ironmo. Within an hour, virtually everyone had heard that Kola claimed to be collecting taxes on the chief's behalf. In his compound, Chief Adeyemi heard the rumor from 3 different messengers. His face remained calm, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his staff. "Bring the stranger to the square tomorrow morning," he instructed quietly. "Everyone should witness what happens next." The next morning arrived bright and hot, the sun already fierce before it fully cleared the horizon. The village square filled with people. Men, women, children, even elders who rarely left their homes. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen. Chief Adeyemi stood in the center, his ceremonial wrapper draped over his shoulder, his staff planted firmly in the red earth. The crowd formed a circle around him, their faces serious and expectant. Kola was led forward by 2 village elders. He tried to maintain his confident smile, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning coolness still lingering in the air. The chief waited until complete silence fell. Palm leaves rustled overhead. A distant rooster crowed. Then Chief Adeyemi spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "Kola, stranger to our village, I ask you one simple question before all these witnesses." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Did you tell people that I sent you to collect contributions for road repairs?" The entire village held its breath. Every eye turned to Kola. He stood there, feeling the pressure of hundreds of gazes, knowing that the truth would shame him but a lie might save his dignity. He made his choice. "Yes," Kola said, his voice steady and clear. "You did send me. You asked me privately because you trust me more than some of these villagers who—" The lie died. His throat locked shut instantly, as if an invisible hand had reached down and crushed his windpipe. A burning sensation erupted in his chest, spreading like fire through his lungs. His voice didn't just fade, it vanished completely, cut off mid-sentence like a candle snuffed out. Kola's eyes went wide with terror. He tried to speak again, his mouth opening and closing silently. No sound emerged. Not a whisper, not a breath. Nothing. The crushing pressure in his chest intensified. He clutched at his throat with both hands, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Panic flooded through him as the world seemed to tilt and spin. The crowd gasped collectively, a sound like wind rushing through leaves. Kola's legs buckled. He fell to his knees in the dusty square, still clawing at his throat, his face contorted in silent agony and disbelief. The village had finally answered him. After days of mercy, after countless warnings ignored, the ancient force that protected truth in Ironmo had reached out and seized the liar by his throat. And it would not let go. Kola knelt in the dust, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. He tried again and again to force sound through his paralyzed throat, but only silence emerged. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with tears of fear and frustration. The villagers stood in shocked stillness, watching the stranger finally face the consequence they had all warned him about. Some faces showed pity. Others showed grim satisfaction. But most simply watched with the solemn understanding of people who had always known this moment would come. Mama Saad stepped forward from the crowd, her white hair gleaming in the sunlight. She knelt slowly beside Kola and placed a weathered hand on his trembling shoulder. "The village has answered him," she said softly, her words carrying across the silent square. "Not with cruelty, but with truth. Every lie he spoke has been weighed and measured. And now the payment has come due." Kola looked up at her with desperate, pleading eyes, still unable to make any sound. His hands reached out as if begging for help, for mercy, for release from this terrifying silence. But Mama Saad only shook her head gently. "The only one who can free you now is yourself. And that requires something you have not yet given: honesty." Chief Adeyemi raised his staff, commanding attention. When the murmuring crowd fell quiet again, he began to speak, explaining something that few outsiders ever learned. "The village does not punish strangers immediately," the chief said, his voice measured and clear. "We understand that travelers come from places where lies are common, where deceit is sometimes necessary for survival. So we give them time. We give them chances. We allow them to see how we live, to understand why truth matters to us." He gestured toward Kola, still kneeling silently in the dust. "But when the lies pile too high, when a stranger shows no intention of respecting our ways, the village responds, not to the first lie or the second, but to all of them at once. Every falsehood spoken is remembered. Every deception is recorded. And when the weight becomes unbearable, the consequence arrives." The crowd listened intently, even though most of them already knew this truth. But hearing it spoken aloud, with the evidence of Kola's punishment before their eyes, made it feel new and powerful. Kola's mind raced as understanding crashed over him. Every lie he had told, the maize cellar, the carpenter work, the royal palace, the yams, the chief's taxes, all of it had been accumulating like stones in an invisible bag, growing heavier with each deception until the weight finally crushed him. That evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and purple, Kola sat alone beneath a mango tree outside the village boundaries. His throat had remained locked for hours. He had tried drinking water, thinking perhaps that would help, but he still couldn't swallow properly without pain. His stomach was empty. No one would give food to someone who couldn't even ask for it. His body ached from kneeling in the sun all day. But worse than any physical discomfort was the crushing weight of isolation and shame. For the first time in his life, Kola couldn't talk his way out of trouble. His clever tongue, his smooth words, his charming lies, all of it was useless now. He was trapped in silence with only his thoughts for company. And those thoughts were unbearable. He remembered every person he had deceived. The kind food seller who had fed him. Bamadil, who had trusted him with valuable yams. The children who had believed his fantastic stories. The chief whose authority he had falsely claimed. Tears rolled down Kola's face as the full magnitude of his actions finally became clear. He had treated these people like tools to be used and discarded. He had mocked their traditions and ignored their warnings. Now, broken and voiceless beneath the darkening sky, Kola made a decision that would change everything. At sunrise, before the village fully woke, Kola walked to Bamadil's farm. His legs felt heavy with fear and shame, but he forced himself to keep moving. He had spent the entire night thinking, planning, trying to find a way forward through the suffocating silence. When he reached the farmer's compound, Bamadil was already awake, preparing his tools for the day's work. The man looked up and saw Kola standing there, and something in his expression softened slightly. Kola knelt in the red earth and used his finger to write words in the dirt, slow and careful. "I lied about the yams. I am sorry." Bamadil read the words, then looked at Kola's face, at the genuine tears there, at the bowed head, at the trembling hands. For a long moment, the farmer said nothing. Then he nodded, just once. And in that instant, something miraculous happened. Kola felt the crushing pressure in his chest ease slightly, not disappear, but loosen, like a rope being given a little slack. A faint, hoarse sound escaped his throat. Not words yet, but the first suggestion that his voice might someday return. Kola gasped, his eyes wide with hope. The path to healing had begun, but he knew it would be long and painful. Over the following days, Kola worked harder than he had ever worked in his life. He couldn't speak to ask for forgiveness, so he let his actions speak instead. He carried heavy water pots from the well to homes throughout the village. He harvested cassava under the scorching sun until his hands bled and his back screamed with pain. He repaired broken fences and cleared paths choked with weeds. Each honest act of labor seemed to strengthen his voice slightly. After 3 days, he could manage rough whispers. After a week, short sentences emerged, scratchy and weak but understandable. The villagers watched his transformation with cautious interest. Some remained suspicious, convinced this was just another trick. Others saw genuine change happening and felt their hearts soften toward the stranger. Mama Saad visited him one afternoon as he worked in the fields. "The village is not cruel," she told him gently. "It only asks for truth. When you give truth, through words or actions, it responds with mercy." Kola nodded, unable yet to fully express his gratitude. But his eyes said what his damaged voice could not. He understood now. Finally, painfully, he understood why truth mattered in this place. And he would spend however long it took to prove he had learned the lesson. 2 weeks after his public humiliation, Chief Adeyemi summoned Kola to the village square again. The entire community gathered once more, though this time the atmosphere felt different. Less tense, more curious. Kola stood before the chief, his head bowed respectfully. His voice had mostly returned, though it still cracked occasionally when he spoke too much. His hands bore the calluses of honest work, and his face had lost its cocky arrogance, replaced by something humbler and more genuine. Chief Adeyemi studied him silently for a long moment. Then he asked a question that made the entire crowd lean forward to hear the answer. "Kola, stranger who came to our village with nothing but lies, I ask you now before all these witnesses, why did you lie so much? What drove you to deceive everyone who showed you kindness?" The square fell completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Kola swallowed hard, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. This was his moment, his chance to speak truth or fall back into comfortable deception. He opened his mouth, and for the first time since arriving in Ironmo village, he told the complete, unvarnished truth. "I grew up with nothing," Kola began, his voice quiet but steady. "My parents died when I was young. I lived on the streets, begging for food, sleeping in doorways. And I learned quickly that the truth, I'm an orphan, I'm hungry, I'm alone, didn't help me. People would look away. They would close their doors." He paused, gathering courage to continue. "But when I lied, when I said my father was a merchant who would return, when I claimed my mother was sick and needed medicine, suddenly people helped. Lies brought me food. Lies brought me shelter. Lies kept me alive." His voice cracked with emotion. So I stopped seeing lies as wrong. I saw them as tools. As the only things I had to survive. The villagers listened in absolute silence, many of them feeling their anger transform into something more complex, understanding mixed with sadness. I came here thinking you were all fools, Kola admitted, shame coloring his words. I thought your tradition about truth was weakness. But I was wrong. You weren't weak, I was. Because I had forgotten that lying makes you powerful for a moment but empty forever. Chief Adeyemi's stern expression softened. He nodded slowly, and something like approval flickered in his eyes. Now you speak truth, the chief said gently. And truth has set you free. Chief Adeyemi raised his staff, and the murmuring crowd fell silent once more. He looked out across the familiar faces of his people he had led for 20 years, people who understood the sacred importance of the tradition they protected. The village punishes lies not to be cruel, the chief announced, his voice carrying clearly, but to teach the value of truth. We are not perfect people. We all make mistakes. We all face temptation to deceive when honesty is difficult. But we choose truth because we know it is the foundation of trust, and trust is the foundation of community. He turned his gaze to Kola, and his expression held both firmness and compassion. This stranger came among us as a liar. He deceived many of you. He mocked our ways and ignored our warnings. But over these past weeks, he has worked to repair what he broke, not with words, but with honest labor and genuine regret. Chief Adeyemi looked out at the crowd. I now ask you, people of Ironmo, does this man deserve another chance? Should we welcome him to stay and learn our ways, or should we ask him to leave? One by one, villagers began to nod. First the elders, then the farmers, then the women and finally even some of the children. Forgiveness rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Kola felt tears streaming down his face as he realized what was happening. He was being given something he didn't deserve but desperately needed, grace. Months passed, and Kola became a familiar sight throughout Ironmo village. He woke before dawn to help farmers in their fields. He carried loads for merchants traveling to market. He taught children how to weave baskets, a skill he had actually learned as a boy before lies had consumed his life. But the most remarkable change was in how people spoke about him. Where once they had whispered warnings, they now shared stories of his transformation. Mothers pointed him out to their children as an example of how people could change. Young men sought his advice about honesty and integrity. One day, a stranger arrived in the village, a young trader looking for somewhere to rest. He began telling exaggerated stories about his wealth and importance, lies slipping easily from his tongue. Kola approached him quietly. Brother, he said gently, let me tell you about this village before you speak any more falsehoods. He explained the tradition of truth, and he shared his own story. The lies, the punishment, the painful journey back to honesty. The young trader listened with wide eyes and, by the end, had fallen silent with newfound respect and caution. That night, Mama Saad smiled as she watched Kola teaching the stranger. He has become one of us now, she said to the chief. The village has transformed him completely. On a warm evening months later, Mama Saad gathered the village children beneath the ancient Iroko tree. They sat in a circle around her, their faces glowing in the light of the setting sun, eager for one of her famous stories. She gestured for Kola to join them, and he sat among the children with humble grace, no longer the arrogant stranger but a trusted member of the community. Children, Mama Saad began, her voice carrying the wisdom of countless years. People sometimes ask why our village punishes lies so harshly. They think we are too strict, too unforgiving. But they don't understand what we know. She pointed to Kola. This man came to us as a liar. The village could have rejected him immediately, could have driven him away. But instead, we gave him time. We gave him chances. And when he finally chose honesty, when he embraced truth instead of fighting it, the village welcomed him completely. The children nodded solemnly, understanding more than their young years might suggest. Truth is not forced here, Mama Saad continued, her ancient eyes twinkling. It is chosen. And that choice makes all the difference. Kola smiled quietly as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He finally understood the profound wisdom of this place, that a lie might open a door for a moment, but only truth lets you stay inside. In the distance, the village drums began their evening rhythm, their heartbeat welcoming the night and celebrating another day of honest living in the village where no one could lie.